Hey guys, welcome back to another Freaky Fast Friday episode where we give you the scoop on a case in 30 minutes or less. So sit back, make yourself a drink or a cup of tea, and join us for this week's episode.
It's your last day.
Okay,
Also, I want you guys to know that John started every time he cooks dinner, he plays Nickelback and Nickelback only. So
honestly,
it's like our thing.
I don't understand why Nickelback gets such a bad rap because
I love
low-key
Nickelback.
love them.
Nickelback and Nicolas Cage, those two.
The two Nicks, that's all you need.
No nicotine, just my Nick Cage.
Abby's turning into like a rapper or something.
Maybe that's
weird flex, but okay. We're keeping all that in, by the way.
Take it off. No, I don't know. You know what I mean.
All right, so all right, guys. So this episode is about the girl in the box. This is gonna be a really sensitive episode as far as like rape, sexual assault, kidnapping, obviously. So if any of that is sensitive to you, we will see you next week, and I would recommend skipping this one.
Also in recent true crime news, Lisa Montgomery has officially been executed. So not a good note to start off on, but I wanted to update you guys because I know we talked about that. So
yeah. All right. So the girl in the box, aka Colleen Stan, was a young woman from Oregon who spent 7 years as a unwilling sex slave to a California couple.
Oh.
So Cameron Hooker was a deeply sadomasochistic man who resided in Red Bluff, California, with his wife Janice and their new baby. The couple married in 1975, and likely due to Janice being younger and much more submissive, this is a lot due to like a lack of meaningful relationships early in life. Like a lot of her quote unquote close family was like, yeah, she didn't really have a lot of good, healthy relationships with people. And due to this is probably why Janice allowed Cameron to perform extreme sexual acts on her, like from the time they were married, even from the time they were dating. He would often hang her naked from her wrists and whip her. He was really into, so like sadomasochism is you get pleasure out of other people feeling pain. She nearly drowned actually once during a session, and because he would do like drowning play. This is basically like think BDSM, but like to the extreme.
I'm a little nauseous, honestly. I know you guys can't see us, but we're making yucky faces.
So yeah, Cameron was really into like think the most extreme BDSM that you can think of. And the thing is like, sure, we could say, oh, Janice was married to him. She was a willing, consensual participant in these sadomasochistic acts. Like that
feels a little like
it was so beyond BDSM. Well, and my personal belief is that Janice was, don't get me wrong, she was a perpetrator in this case as well, but she was also like a victim in her own way. And I think that she later in life definitely came to terms with the fact that she was being victimized by Cameron. But I don't think she should get a free pass, but I'm mostly prefacing with all of this because I just want everybody to understand that Janice was like, she was acting under a lot of self-preservation. So from the very beginning of Cameron and Janice's relationship, Cameron was pretty honest about the fact that he wanted to have like a sex slave, like, and very bluntly was like, I want it to be like an unwilling sex slave that I can do whatever I want to. Like that's what I like crave. Like I don't want just like you who's like putting up with it because you're married to me. Like I want like a sex slave.
Ew.
And at one point Janice agreed on 2 conditions. He could keep a sex slave in the house so that she could safely have a baby and avoid the more intense whipping and pain play that Cameron was a fan of. And then 2, she also insisted he never have penetrative sex with anyone but her. So she, in all of her faults, don't get me wrong, again, I firmly believe she was a victim in a lot of ways, but she was like, you can only have penetrative sex with me. and I want you to let me have a baby, and I want this and this, and yeah. Anyway,
So my thing
but I'll
about
help you get a sex slave. I'll help you find
Well,
one.
and she's basically trying to save herself from the trauma she knows she'll have to continue to endure.
Yeah, that's
if
exactly
he
what.
doesn't. I mean, that's essentially what she's saying. Like, I mean,
And
basically.
if she is feeling trapped and like as a victim, I personally believe she sounds like a victim. And
rather-
everybody
she wasn't
responds
really.
differently
Unfortunately,
to
she wasn't
trauma.
really thinking about.
Well, and so here's the
person.
thing. She was an active participant in procuring the sex slaves. Like, you know what I mean? So,
No, I know what you mean, but I'm saying like if she felt like that was her only way out, like
yeah,
I mean
I
not to
don't
not to
want
say
you
that
guys.
I'm just saying not to say that she was in the right.
It's an
Sensitive.
it's an extreme. No, it's an extreme case, so we can't. I mean, we have nothing to compare it to. But also, I mean, she's not innocent in all of this. Do I think that she was trying her best to put the abuse on somebody else so that she wouldn't have to do it? Like, yeah. Is that right? Definitely not. And I
Exactly.
think that she is still very much responsible for a lot of the things that followed, you know?
Right.
So the couple's first attempt to capture a sex slave for Cameron was 19-year-old hitchhiker Marlise Spanhawk in Chico, California. She was held for only a day while hung nude from her wrists and tortured, after which Cameron shot her in the stomach with a pellet gun and strangled her to death for unknown reasons. He just, I guess, yeah. He only had her for like 24 hours, essentially. She was buried near Lassen Volcanic National Park, and her body was never found. Police actually believed at the time she was killed by her boyfriend because they like had reportedly had like an argument before she got picked up by Cameron and Janice. Their last name is Hooker. I don't know if I want to call them the Hookers because I don't know.
It's kind of like an ironic.
It's oddly coincidental.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anyway, the Hookers, before she got picked up by the Hookers, she had a fight with her boyfriend, and so they at the time believed it was the boyfriend, but they obviously they didn't have any evidence because they didn't have a body, but that's kind of like what they were thinking at the time. Right. So on May 19th, 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan hitchhiked out of her hometown of Eugene, Oregon, heading towards Northern California for her friend's birthday. She had already turned down one car that tried to pick her up because it was mostly, well, it was all men, and there was a lot of them in there. And, you know, reasonably, she was like, oh, no, like, I couldn't get out of this, right? But then next comes, like, a really young family with a little baby in a two-door Dodge Colt, and she was like, oh, this seems way more reasonable. Like, it's like, these two young parents and like the lady is holding a baby, you know, because they didn't have car seats back then. She was just like holding the baby.
So
wow,
that's like especially sad to me because if I were ever in a position where I was hitchhiking, which thank God I'm not ever in a position, but I would have thought the same thing. I would have had the same thought process, you know, and then knowing what we know now happens to her.
Yeah,
it's horrible because it's like I would have thought the same thing. And she was horribly, horribly wrong. So
hold on. So the wife and the babe, they used the wife and the baby as bait,
basically.
More or less, yeah. Janice like was an active participant in procuring the sex slaves. So
right, yeah.
So Colleen Stan got into their Colt and they started to drive. They drove a while and finally stopped for a bathroom break. Colleen returned to the car after going to the bathroom, and she sat down in the back seat, and there was now a wooden BDSM head box in the back of the car. This is, I guess, not like a super crazy BDSM thing. It's like they use it for sense deprivation. Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, sense deprivation essentially. So like you can't see or hear really anything or smell anything.
It goes over your head. Okay.
Yeah, you like put your head in it. And it usually like locks in some way. So Colleen, like, she looked at it and she thought it was weird, but she she just chose to ignore it. Like, she didn't bring it up. She didn't even really know what she would say. I mean, who knows that she even knew exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So a while later, they stopped in a remote area, and Janice got out of the car with the baby. After she got out of the car, Cameron held a knife up to Colleen and made her put the locking wooden box over her head so that she couldn't see where they were going. So after they drove a while more with Colleen's head in the box, and they finally got home. When they got to the hooker's home, they hung Colleen from her wrists, stripped her clothes and the head box off, and whipped her. The couple then had sex on the floor while Colleen hung there blindfolded. So she could hear them like having sex below her, essentially.
Which makes sense as to why Caitlin at the beginning was like, "Yeah, I see your point."
She's definitely not innocent.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, she's I don't know.
However, the main bad guy in this story, quote unquote, is Cameron, obviously.
1000%. But
so, for the next several months, Cameron would have daily torture sessions with Colleen in the basement of the hooker's home. He would whip, electrically shock, and he also used a homemade rack to torture Colleen. Cameron used a stretcher, and you can kind of imagine what it does, that left Colleen with permanent back and shoulder problems like that she has to this day.
She lives?
She does, if that makes anybody feel any better.
That makes me feel a little bit better, but oh my God.
I'm just so thankful that, I don't know. My heart hurts. This is a tough one for me, guys. I am not like, it's just, I'm not normally very sensitive, and this one is like, it's really hard to hear about. So shout out to listeners that have stayed with us.
So in the first month that Colleen was in the hookers' home, she lost about 22 pounds due to starvation. They would give her like literal scraps, like just barely enough to keep her alive, essentially. And on Janice's condition, Cameron would never vaginally rape Colleen. But after her torture, she would regularly watch Cameron and Janice have intercourse, like in front of her. At some point, Cameron successfully convinced Colleen he was part of a secret organization called the Company, who would find Colleen and her family and kill them if she ever tried to escape. And this is obviously like a really extreme case of like Stockholm syndrome. Like, he had convinced Colleen, like, you don't want to leave. You're better off here. Like, you are worthless, and like you're better off just like letting me torture you.
Yeah, because you'll be killed.
Running away.
Yeah.
In January 1978, so we're coming up on like the year mark, right? Yeah, coming up. Colleen, in January 1978, signed a contract agreeing to be kept as a sex slave by the hookers. She became known as Kay, while she would refer to Cameron as Master and Janice as Ma'am. Cameron and Janice listed their last names on the contract as Powers. This was more or less like a pretty legit contract where she was just agreeing to be, she's essentially agreeing to any like abuse. Obviously, like, wasn't like a law-abiding thing, but so Cameron's torture and rape was allegedly inspired by the 1954 French erotic novel The Story of O. In this book, it's just like an extremely like sexual like love story, essentially, where like a really rich man keeps a much more willing sex slave, and her name is O, and that's like what she goes by. And it's just basically like smut, essentially.
Smut from
I don't know
the
if,
time.
Smut, yeah. And I guess Cameron was a fan of this book.
Well,
so
he took it to the extreme in his own.
I don't.
Well,
yeah.
And my understanding is that in the book, O like falls in love with her captor. And like not only that, but she's like essentially like his sex slave. So
maybe he thought like that was how it was gonna go.
Well, and obviously I'm paraphrasing. Like, I've never read the book. I'm assuming it's in French.
I've never even heard of it, to be frank, but okay.
Well, yeah, yeah. Cameron continued to use the heavy wooden head box to deprive Colleen of her senses. Um, it was pretty heavy, so it was really like she had to like strain her neck muscles to keep her head upright. Not that it mattered because she couldn't see anything with it on, but she was also Colleen was initially kept for 23 hours a day in a wooden coffin type box under Cameron and Janice's bed. This was like for the first 3 years of her captivity
Okay,
in
so
there,
what
except
about
for the hour that Cameron tortured her. So she was in there the rest of the time. She
what
was only
about
let out for him to torture her.
what about their child? Like, what the heck? Like, how could you
So
do this and have a kid
as
just
the
like roaming around the house
well,
too?
so as the child grows up, it's pretty understood that like they just think Colleen is the babysitter, and when they would like lock her away at night, like the kid just assumed that the babysitter had gone home. Well, I
Oh
mean,
my
that comes up a
gosh.
little bit, but so Colleen would sometimes sleep in the bed with Cameron and Janice. This was like later on, but and on at least one occasion, Cameron forced Colleen to perform oral sex on Janice. This gets added to the list of his things that he's charged with. But yeah, Janice gave birth to a child in 1978 on the bed in the hooker's home while Colleen was in the box below.
Uh,
Oh my god.
So Colleen's compliance later earned her the ability to roam around the home. And she even babysat the hooker's children every once in a while. They again
Weird.
just thought she was like a housekeeper, babysitter. Like they were young too, so
Yeah, I guess they weren't too old at the time, but
yeah.
weird.
Um,
well, also,
he
when you trust your parents, like you wouldn't question that kind of thing.
yeah. Well, and they never like abused in front of the children. So Cameron actually allowed Colleen to call her family in 1979. And then in 1981, so we're at the like almost 4 year mark since Colleen got abducted. In 1981, Cameron went with her to visit her family, most likely so that she wouldn't like spill the beans. But he posed as her boyfriend. There's actually like this really creepy picture, and they're like kind of like hugging each other from the side, and they're both smiling. Um, during this family visit. Her family was allegedly like fearful that something was wrong. Um, they at one point, I think, kind of believed that she was in a cult because she was wearing handmade clothes most of the time,
Mm.
and she was like with this like weird guy who was like not considerably older than her, but definitely probably had some like very like visually obvious
Differences,
for
kind
her.
of.
No, well, no, I mean like I think she was very submissive to him at this point. And I
Okay.
feel like that's pretty obvious, especially like if your family knows you really well and they're like, wow, she's normally really outgoing and like a way different person.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there's like this really creepy picture of the two of them like laughing and like smiling at each other and like hugging. So, but her family like didn't really say anything because they were much more afraid that if they like led on that they knew something bad would happen to Colleen. So when Colleen Cameron returned from the trip to visit her family, she was finally allowed to no longer sleep in the wooden box, but she instead got to sleep on the bathroom floor where she was chained to the toilet.
Slightly better.
So they
Not a confined space, so I guess sort of better.
they trust. It's like they started to trust her more, but they
I think
still.
they trusted the fact that she was so manipulated at that point, you know.
But they still knew that like if she had a chance, she would get the hell out of there.
I feel like that's where I don't know how to make it make sense, but where like kidnappers go wrong, really it's going right, like because we want them to be rescued, obviously, but I know that it's happened in multiple instances that a kidnapper like finally gets lax because they feel like their captive is finally like
Beaten
submissive, and
beaten
then
into
they
submission.
and then
And
they run and
yeah,
they yeah, I mean, I know that that's happened before, and that's what
That-
that makes me think of.
That's exactly what I thought of too, is like that she's getting closer to the point where she might be able to make a break for it.
Right.
So, Cameron continued to torture and confine Colleen, but she was allowed to occasionally leave the house to jog and sometimes to even go to the bars with Janice, where Janice allegedly would complain about the abuse she had received from him in the early years of their marriage. So essentially, she would like take her out drinking, and Janice would, like, "Oh my God, my life was so hard. You know all the stuff he's doing to you right now? Yeah, he used to do that to me too."
I hate her.
Like they were friends, you know. In
They
May
had something in
1984,
common.
in May 1984, around the 7-year mark, she was allowed to leave the house for a part-time job cleaning at a motel. Up until this point, she had never left the house unsupervised. Janice began to kind of see some, like, I don't know, more or less it sounds like she kind of came to her senses, but like not because she was like such a great person. It was because she discovered that Cameron had in fact been vaginally raping Colleen the entire time, despite their quote unquote agreement. Although Cameron claims he only ever vaginally and anally raped Colleen using foreign objects.
Oh, so like
He thought he
Colleen
stuck to
said
the
something,
agreement.
probably.
Perhaps, yeah. Cameron also told Janice that he planned on marrying Colleen and obtaining another slave, like, in her place, essentially.
Huh?
So, yeah. Janice confessed everything at this point to a pastor, and after the pastor encouraged Janice to do something about it, Janice went home and encouraged Colleen to run in August 1984. So, we're
God.
about 7 years... May, June, July, August, like 7 years and 3 months into her captivity.
Okay, so we're back to hating Janice just a medium amount.
So Janice finally told Colleen that the company was not real, that was fake. Colleen went to a bus station where she called Cameron and told him that she was leaving, and she finally bussed home and never spoke to them again.
Interesting that she called him and said, "I'm leaving."
Praise be.
So it's really like devastating for me because Cameron like later tried to say in trial that this was like a hard goodbye from a woman he loved, and he was like
What?
crying while he was saying that. And
I
think
hate
in
him.
his own like twisted way, he thought they were in some kind of relationship.
Well,
Oh, I'm sure he did.
And honestly, I'm sure to some extent Colleen thought the same thing. And that's why she even thought to call him and say, "Hey, I'm leaving," because
Well,
you know,
Also, she probably had a
obviously-
relationship with the children.
yeah, more or less. It doesn't sound like she was with the children unsupervised very often.
But like
also
she
the
was
older
their
one was only like
babysitter.
7. The older one was
Oh.
like 7.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
Well,
now the kids are old enough that they would know about this, which is, can you imagine
Oh, definitely.
how
Yeah.
traumatizing that would be to know that
They-
you grew up with that?
I'm assuming so they obviously their names aren't public, but Janice has like changed her name and has tried to fly under the radar since this happened.
So she wasn't convicted?
No. So we're gonna get to kind of
I'm sure we will.
We're wrapping
Sorry.
it up. We're wrapping it up a little bit because this is a freaky fast episode. The reason that I decided to make this a freaky fast episode is because I think that this case is pretty like
brutal.
It's pretty brutal, and like there's a lot of stuff that I like wouldn't really feel comfortable covering. So I'm giving you the gist of it, but just
Yeah.
understand that bare minimum Cameron tortured Colleen for like minimum 7 years. Like brutally tortured her, manipulated her mentally, emotionally, physically. So, on Janice's encouragement, Colleen told no one of the rape, torture, and abuse that she had endured the last 7 years. Janice initially believed that she could reform Cameron in some way, but in November 1984, she finally reported her husband to the police. Although Janice had burned the original slave contract, a copy was later found and used in the trial. I believe Janice burned it. So during the trial, the defense, so Cameron's defense, tried to use the contract, as well as Colleen's like overall compliance as proof of this arrangement being in some way consensual. Cameron tried to convince the jury that Colleen had fallen in love with him and stayed because she wanted to. So based on testimony from both Janice and Colleen, as well as the copy of the slave contract, Cameron Hooker was convicted of kidnapping, using a knife in an abduction, rape, and sexual abuse on October 31st, 1985. He was charged with 8 felony counts of rape, sodomy, kidnapping, and forced oral copulation. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison on November 22nd, 1985. With Judge Clarence Knight remarking at the time that Hooker is, quote, the most dangerous psychopath I have ever dealt with, who will be a danger to women as long as he is alive.
Yep.
Janice was not charged in return for her testimony, and she continues to live in California under a new name. It is sort of a matter of opinion whether she was guilty by involvement in the crimes. Many people also believed that since she was only 15 when they married, that she felt trapped in the relationship. Cameron has since been denied probation twice. Colleen Stan said in 2015, before one of his probation hearings, that she wasn't convinced he was as feeble as he was claiming to be. Because, I mean, he's old, but, like, not that old. But that was, like, his...
I don't care how old he is.
I don't remember what it's called, but it's, like... It's an appeal that you can use once you're basically like,
I'm crippled enough that I'm not
too
a
crippled
threat.
that I would never reoffend, essentially.
Which I don't feel that way about this
Colleen
man.
Stan said she wasn't convinced,
But, like,
and she firmly thought that he could do it again if he was let out.
I think that's such an interesting, like, means for probation, because wouldn't you want to say, oh, I'll never, like, I just don't want to do it again. Not that, like, you just physically couldn't. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, not a good like commitment. I guess, like, oh, I can't do it again. Not I won't do it again.
Again, Colleen is alive to this day. I believe she goes by a different name now.
She is alive, yeah.
Yeah, she's a really strong person, honestly, as far as I'm concerned, like, to get through all of that and not to ever, like, the fact that we can attribute some of her running to Janice, obviously, because Janice encouraged her to run, but also, like, one of my biggest reasons for not really buying that Janice is, like, as innocent as she was, like, trying to make herself seem is that, so Cameron, you know, you don't just, like, you have something mentally wrong with you if you, like sadomasochism is not a treatable illness as far as I'm concerned, and
treatable by death.
Sadism, honestly, if Janice hadn't turned him in, he would have found another slave, honestly. So.
Oh, for sure, which, I mean, I feel like that has to give her a little bit of grace.
Yeah. So yeah, guys, that was this week's episode on Colleen Stan. Thanks so much for listening. As always, you can follow us on Instagram at Who What Where Podcast. We'll post some relevant pictures over there. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment down below. You can also find us on Facebook. And yeah, just thanks for listening. If you are a loyal listener or a new listener, we really sincerely appreciate it. And we will see you in the next episode.